Good evening and welcome to City of Glendale Civil Service Commission for July 23rd, 2014. Before we have a roll call, I'd like to welcome our newest commissioner, Mr. Harigi, and let's have the roll call now.
Commissioner Yakubian.
Tallene, here.
Commissioner Devine.
Here.
Commissioner Origi.
Here.
And Chair Gazarian.
Present.
For the record, Commissioner Manukian is absent tonight.
Thank you. And before we have the next item, actually I will reserve comment for our departing commissioner later on. Let's have the next item, please.
Reorganization of the Commission.
Thank you. Mr. Doyle.
Mr. Chair, annually the Commission will elect a chair and vice chair. And so at this time, I think it would be appropriate for one of the commissioners to make nominations for chair or vice chair. Either order would be fine. So
I would actually like to make a nomination for vice chair for Mr. Devine.
I second that.
They need to vote on it.
you do. So, roll call.
Commissioner Yakubian.
Yes.
Commissioner Devine.
Yes.
Commissioner Origi.
Yes.
Chair Gazarian.
Yes.
And I would like to make a similar nomination for chair for Mr. Gazarian.
Commissioner Yakubian.
Yes.
Commissioner Devine.
Yes.
Commissioner Origi.
Yes.
Chair Gazarian.
Thank you. Yes.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you. Next item, please.
Minutes.
Mr. Doyle.
This would be the minutes for the last meeting, which was June 25th, 2014. I do believe we have at least 3 of you who were present at that meeting. Therefore, we'll need a motion to approve the minutes.
I move for approval and dispense with reading.
Actually, I have before we vote on that, I have a remark. In reviewing the minutes, item 11 seems to recite the discussion that took place regarding the civil service rules and regulations. And what caught my attention is that whereas minutes generally ought to reflect actions taken by this body, this particular entry seems to go on and talk about who spoke in favor of what position. If we're going to do that, I'm going to ask that it be amended to include the concerns expressed by the commissioners with respect to what appeared to us to have been a practice that was contrary to the civil service rules. So rather than doing that, I would recommend that we delete references as to who spoke and in favor of what, and rather leave the last sentence. After much discussion, it was decided that staff will provide the commission with various options for handling these appeals at a future commission meeting. That would be my recommendation. Any discussion as to that?
I agree. In fact, I had that note here, and I'm glad you picked up on that.
Okay.
Likewise.
So could the minutes be modified to reflect the deletion of the references as to who testified and in favor of what, and just leave the recommendation, the decision rather, after the discussion.
Mr. Chair, we will amend these minutes, and if I understand what you're saying, delete everything up to the final sentence saying after much discussion it was decided that staff will provide the commission with various options for handling these appeals. Your point is well taken. I mean, these are intended to be action minutes.
Right.
But if you recall, it was a very long discussion. And
Yes,
I think
of course.
staff
was
trying to capture some of the highlights, but we have certainly no problem modifying it as per your instructions. So
Very well. Thank you.
We will do so.
So with that,
I amend the minutes as we just discussed, and again move for approval and dispense with reading.
Second.
very well. It'll be all in favor of those who attended that meeting. Obviously, Commissioner Harigi wasn't present. Thank you. Next item, please.
Oral communications.
Thank you. Seeing no cards and no one approaching the podium, I will ask for the next item.
Recruitment and Examination Report.
Thank you. Mr. Doyle?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the Commission. This is a note and file item. It's the summary of our recruitment and examination workload status. This gives a general impression of the current recruitment activity throughout the organization, and really it's one of the primary functions of the human resources staff, as well as Commission, which exercises oversight over this process. In this report, you will see, again, the positions that are at various stages in the recruitment phase, and you see about 48 processes that are currently occurring. And this is more or less where we've been over the past few months. As we finish some recruitments, new ones come in. We have vacancies and such that need to be filled. So it's a fairly good summary of what's going on as far as the opening dates, the filing dates, dates of exams, and such. So if you have questions on this, I'd be happy to try and answer them. Otherwise, this is note and file.
Any questions? No? Thank you. Next item, please.
Eligible lists established.
Thank you. Mr. Doyle?
Mr. Chair, members of the Commission, similar to the last item, this is note and file. This is a reflection of the eligible lists that have been established since our last meeting. As I often say, this is the culmination of our recruitment and examination efforts. As you know, for every examination process we do, there are various steps in that process, the first being determining whether it's a promotional or an open exam. Promotional exams are those that are limited to just candidates internally within the organization. The open exams are those that are open to anyone in the general population, and those are the ones we typically advertise and outward and try to seek large numbers of applications. Typically, again, you'll see a very small applicant pool on the promotional recruitment since they are limited to internal candidates, whereas the open, you'll see a significant number, sometimes over 100, sometimes higher than that. This report does, again, illustrate the lists that have been established in the last month, and it shows you the total number of applications received, and the far right column addresses the total number of individuals who have made it through the various stages of that selection process and have made it onto the eligible list to be hired. Again, if you have questions on this report, I'd be happy to try and answer them. Otherwise, it is note and file.
Any questions?
Just had one on the police officer lateral transfer where they showed 139 applications received and 4 ended up on the list. Can you explain what caused that big disparity?
I can try. Russ Kwan is here. Typically, the column involving the applications is all of those who apply, and that includes those who change their mind or decide not to show up. So my sense is that there was a much smaller number that actually participated in whatever exam we conducted, which could explain the small number that made it through. But I'm sure Russ has the details on that. So,
yes, Mr. Chairman, members of the Commission, Russ Kwan, Human Resources Analyst. With regards to the position of police officer lateral transfer, that recruitment is limited to current police officers that have a basic post certificate as well as currently employed by a California law enforcement agency. So the number of 139 applications is actually reflective of basically everybody who put in, whether or not they were a current police officer or not. So out of that 139 applications, actually there are only 35 candidates that were currently police officers in that mix. What then happens is after the initial application review, we invite them to a physical agility test. That's where the numbers dropped off even further. We had a total of 7 people that showed up to our physical agility test, and basically everybody did pass that examination to move on to the oral interviews. However, at the oral interviews is where we did lose 3 people to the oral interview process. 4 people passed.
Were the only people that passed, were they from inside? I noticed it was an open exam, so I imagine people came in from other jurisdictions.
That's correct.
So at the final end of the day, are these 4 all from internal?
No, they are from other law enforcement agencies.
The whole concept of lateral transfer is laterally transferring from another police agency, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Right. All right. Any other questions? Very well. Thank you, Mr. Kwan. Thank you. Next item, please.
Class specification for approval, Claims and Litigation Support Supervisor.
Thank you. Mr. Doyle?
Mr. Chair, members of the Commission, this is a class specification for a new classification, Claims and Litigation Support Supervisor. This is a classification within our legal department. The position was approved by the City Council at its June 3rd, 2014 meeting. This position is going to be dealing with the processing and oversight of litigation claims made against the city. It'll be working very closely with both the transactional attorneys within our city attorney's office, the litigators, as well as our risk management staff. The work that's being done in this function is fairly highly specialized, and the individual currently performing these duties is in the classification of an executive analyst, and it's sort of a generic job title, which really isn't very reflective of the actual work that is done in this position. So really to us it makes sense to have a job description that's truly reflective of what this individual is doing. This is not an additional position. It's simply taking an existing position and giving it a new and more descriptive title. So with that, it's here for your consideration. We have Manya Hunanian from my staff who worked on this with the legal team, and Jillian Van Meiden from the City Attorney's office is here if you have any specific questions.
Any questions?
One question. What is the intent or purpose of doing this? What is accomplished by changing the title like that?
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Devine, as I said, it's a means of providing, first of all, a better title, more descriptive title, and really, if you read the essential functions, the definition of and all the minimum requirements of the job, it really is a better reflection of what the individual in this position actually does versus the classification that they're currently in. And we have lots of classifications throughout the city, such as administrative analyst, executive analyst, that are very general. And I think our movement over the last 5 to 10 years has been to sort of move away from those very broad titles and those job descriptions and get to an area that is more descriptive, more reflective of the work actually done.
Okay. And will this new title preclude if somebody wants to transfer, or let's say they're bumped from another position that's called what is it? Executive analyst. If they're moved or bumped, will this new title preclude them from getting into this position?
If the person has never held the position of claims and litigation support, they would not be able to bump into this position. So,
Okay.
I have a couple of questions. One is, with the other characteristics, page 2 of 3 at the bottom, work necessary hours and times to accomplish goals. Now, I understand this is FLSA exempt. Does that mean just work as many hours as necessary to get the job done and don't get paid overtime? Or, what does that mean?
Chair Gazarian, in a word, that's a fairly accurate description of what's expected. This is a management level position. It is exempt from the Fair Labor Standards Act due to the nature of those duties, and therefore the individual would be expected to work additional hours as needed to accomplish their tasks without consideration of overtime.
And my second question is something that has in the past been brought up, and correct me if I'm wrong, by Commissioner Yakubian on other matters, but this one seems to catch my attention. With education and training, when we keep saying a bachelor's degree is required, and here we're listing either public administration, business administration, or a related field, but then we have a note that says an equivalent combination of experience in education and or training may substitute for the listed minimum requirements. Let me know, does that mean it may substitute for the bachelor degree?
In some cases, perhaps it may. That is, the note is it's often referred to as a substitution clause. And I will say it is not invoked regularly, but
Right.
if there are circumstances where, if someone perhaps does not have the bachelor's degree, or they're short of their bachelor's degree, or they may have an associate degree,
Right.
yet their experience requirement is not only spot on meeting the needs of the position, but their experience requirement is overwhelmingly higher than what we're asking in this job description, then the consideration could be given to that particular note. I will say it's not something that's abused. It's not something that's used frequently. My analysts, my staff know that any time that substitution clause is invoked, it has to come through me specifically, and we use it on rare occurrences. But when it's valid, we'll make that determination, and when it's not, we won't invoke it. So.
And having said all that, do you think it's appropriate to list it under education and training as a requirement versus desired? When we say a related field, bachelor's degree is, or a related in whatever degrees, is required. It's really desired, because if it was truly required, there would not be any substitution for it. It would be a requirement, wouldn't it?
That's a fair point to make, but again, we view it as a requirement.
Okay, and you'll make an exception if you...
Unless, yeah,
I see.
it should
All
be
right.
the exception that there be.
All right. If you're comfortable with it, you're
Very
comfortable
much.
with it.
Yes.
All right, good enough. Any other questions? No? Very well. Thank you very much. Next item, please.
Oh, I think we need a vote.
Oh, we need to vote on this. Okay.
Second.
Unanimous? Yes. Yes, unanimous consent. Thank you. Next item, please.
Class specification for approval, Library, Arts and Culture Administrative Manager.
Thank you. Mr. Doyle?
Mr. Chair, members of the Commission, similar to the last item, this is a new classification title approved by the City Council. The title of this classification is Library, Arts and Culture Administrative Manager. This is a position within the administrative structure of the library department, really to handle the administrative or the sort of the business side of the library operation. Libraries traditionally are run by librarians, individuals with master's degrees in library science or master information systems degrees, and really that's a reflection of the more professional side of how the libraries are run. This position is not a librarian type position. This is more somebody to handle the business operations, some of the core administrative functions, things like budget, facility management, personnel issues, things like that are really involve a more generic set of managerial skills as opposed to the specific library background. And the library department has one individual who performs these functions, and alongside that individual, we have library administrators who do the more practical, hands-on library type related duties. Again, this individual will work alongside those other administrators, but working directly with the library director again, the more business and administrative ends of the library operation. Again, this is similar to the other position. This is not a new position. It is rather a reclassification. And by the way, the library department is now called the Library Arts and Culture Department. Therefore, all of the titles here begin with Library Arts and Culture. So again, this is a new specification for your approval. We have Cindy Cleary, Director of Library Arts and Culture here, if you have questions, and from my staff, Rosie Akopian, who worked on this as well.
Any questions? I have a question. Well, others may decide. I just want to understand. It used to be Library Arts and Culture Administrator, and now it's not a new position, it's just a new title, correct? And it's now called Library Arts and Culture Administrative Manager, right?
No. We have, if you'll look on the organization chart, and I think that's reflective of...
I have 2 pages of the charts. That's why on the first page, I see Director of Library Arts and Culture, and underneath that, Library Arts and Culture Administrator. And on the second chart, I see Director of Library Arts and Culture, and then I see to the right of it, Arts and Culture Commission. And then underneath that, I no longer see, well, actually, I do see the administrator. He's now somewhere, he or she is down under Development, Digital, and Collection.
These are, sir, this isn't a before and after. This is the...
Oh, it isn't?
Yeah,
Oh.
This is 2 parts of the...
2 parts of the same.
Correct. The first page reflects what appears to be the branches of the library, your brand, the neighborhood libraries,
Right.
children's services, and adult services. Those are all areas overseen by one administrator. And then on the second page, you have, looks like an administrator over technical services and information technology. There's another administrator who's solely working on the building management capital projects. And that's really the big work that's been done there is the renovation of Brand Library, and now there's going to be a significant renovation occurring with the Central Library. This position is on the far left of that.
Right. Okay.
And again, that person will be doing the more business related functions, administration essentially, and we are going to be having some vacancies in probably a few months for at least 2 of those administrators, and this individual is likely to take on some of those duties as well.
Okay.
So.
And the more business-related functions that will be performed by this office is as it relates to all of the subdivisions of the Library Arts and Culture.
That's correct.
All right.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you. Any questions?
I do. I notice this is another case where a executive analyst position is being reclassified. Is this a trend that you're going to be eliminating all the executive analyst positions in the city and reallocate them to job-specific titles?
Commissioner Devine, it would be a trend to say that we are trying to specialize our jobs into really the work that's more reflective of what they're doing. Executive analyst is one such classification. Administrative analyst is another. Many of the clerical positions are such that they're very broad, and the work that we're asking them to do, whether it be the housing department or public works or other city departments, police, crime analysis, whatever, will be more descriptive in both title and the minimum requirements as well as the job functions. It's just, I think, where we need to go as an organization. So.
Okay.
Any other questions? Very well. Did we need to vote on this? We did, right?
Yeah, I move for approval.
Okay.
Second?
Yes. Unanimous consent. Thank you. Next item, please.
Request for temporary appointments in the Glendale Police Department.
Thank you. Mr. Doyle?
Mr. Chair, members of the Commission, this is a kind of a different request. I don't think this is one that you've seen in recent past, but it's a request for approval on some temporary appointments, and these happen to be in the police department. If I could provide a little background, the police department has had to make some acting or temporary appointments due to a police lieutenant who is going to be assigned to a long-term task force involving other agencies. The department needs to fill that vacant position that lieutenant has vacated on a temporary basis while that individual is gone. Additionally, since a sergeant's position or a sergeant will be temporarily moved up to take this lieutenant's position, it'll also create the need for a temporary sergeant opening. Now, management has the right to make temporary appointments, acting assignments. In fact, many of the MOUs, not the police department's MOU, but many of the MOUs have provisions for acting assignments. And it's fully within management's rights to make those acting or temporary appointments. However, there is a provision in the civil service rules that limits these appointments or these temporary appointments when an eligibility list is in existence. And that's the case that we have here. If you'll look on your staff report where we talk about the authority, and there's a Section 9 from the Civil Service Rules and Regulations, number 3 indicates, notwithstanding any other provision of these rules, no temporary salaried appointment shall be used for more than 30 days after the establishment of an eligible list for the position unless such appointment is extended by the Commission. And in this case, we do have eligibility lists for both lieutenant and sergeant, but since we will need these temporary appointments to go beyond 30 days, we're seeking approval from the Commission to make these appointments. And I will say, again, we have lieutenant list, which was established in October of 2013. We have a sergeant list that was established in April of 2014. Police department is going to those lists and reaching out to the next available names on those lists for these temporary appointments. But unfortunately, we can't make them permanent appointments because we really don't have the budgeted position in place, because we have an individual who's away and presumably will be coming back at some point when that special assignment is done. So hopefully I've explained this clearly enough. But if you have questions, I'd be happy to try and answer them. And we do have staff. Deputy Chief Povolitis is here, and Mr. Kwan from my staff to further clarify if the need be.
Very well. I think there's questions. I'll reserve mine. Yes?
Yeah. I may be stumbling through this a little bit because I'm not sure I understand the process completely. But so if there is an eligible list, I assume that it comes to the Commission because the preference would be that someone permanent be hired from the eligible list. Is that sort of the theory behind the rules?
That's correct.
So for the lieutenant position, since the eligible list was from October of 2013, what is the normal time frame for these positions to be filled from those lists?
Right away, typically. When there's a vacancy that arises, whether somebody resigns or retires or a new position gets approved, as soon as the list is established, the department will put in the appropriate paperwork to fill that position, and we'll go to that list. And I think you're aware the top 3 names off the list are given to the department, and they can then do a further interview and select one of those 3. That's the typical process. And these lists go into effect, and they last for a duration of 2 years. Again, in this case, we don't actually have a budgeted position, but we want to make temporary appointments due to the fact that there's a need. There's a need for a lieutenant, and subsequently there'll be a need for a sergeant. So.
Okay, thank you.
Because the sergeant's going to move up to a lieutenant
Correct.
position.
There'll be a move up.
Right. Mr. Devine?
Okay, you said these were coming off the eligible list. Will the rule of 3 still apply as far as who was selected? Will it be the same process?
It doesn't have to, but I will say the next names, the next viable names on those lists are being appointed to this position. And if maybe Deputy Chief Povolitis could explain one of the lists, we had to go to the second available name. I forget if that was the lieutenant or the sergeant, but we are going to the list. We're not required to, but it makes sense to do that, certainly, just because they competed for the process and they should have a right, even if it is a temporary opening for that.
And I may have not read this, but how long are we approving this for? You said if it's beyond the 30 days, it has to come to the commission. So in this particular case, how long is the temporary appointment that we're approving?
That would have been one of my questions.
It's a good.
No.
We're empty right now.
Well, I think the police department has the right to appoint for 30 days and then seek further extension of that period of time. Whether or not that's been done already, I don't know, but I'm assuming that it's going to be done one way or the other for at least 30 days, and the request is for additional time. Deputy Chief?
Mr. Chair, members of the Commission, Carl Povolitis, Deputy Chief. Actually, if you could accommodate the request through about the mid-year budget review, so through December, we would appreciate that.
Of this year?
Of this year. That will give us time to rework the organization in light of the budgetary realities that we face, and by then we should have it settled out, and it may be sooner than that.
That's very reasonable. Thank you. No more questions? Any other questions? No. Okay, I have one question, I think, remaining, maybe two. Actually, the second question was answered by Deputy Chief, the length, because I assume that the vacancy created by the departing or reassignment of the person outside to a task force is for a longer period of time than a number of months. Generally, my experience is that these task force assignments are a year or more. Am I mistaken in that?
No, we anticipate the assignment would be longer than that, but sort of when you invest in the task forces, there are other opportunities that might allow us to budgetarily maneuver in a different way, and we're looking to take advantage of those. Okay,
all right, fair enough. The one I did not understand, Mr. Doyle, is the last paragraph under the request said the individuals to be appointed temporarily are both on the respective eligible lists for police lieutenant and police sergeant and are immediately reachable on the lists. What does that mean, immediately reachable on the lists? You mean they're available?
That is correct.
They're available to be appointed?
Yes, as I said earlier, they're really the next viable names for those openings. So, instead of going to the bottom of the list or to the middle of the list, we're going right to the top of the. Okay,
and you quoted. Forgive me. You cited Section 9 B3. I had a question about B2, which said temporary appointees may fill permanent classified positions for up to 6 months unless extension is granted by Director of Human Resources for leave of absences or emergency. You would be the Director of Human Resources. Extension is granted to whom for leave of absence or emergency? Would this be the extension granted to the person who's not available to remain unavailable? Or would it be for the person that is temporarily filling the position, which the Deputy Chief alluded that at the end of the year there may be some maneuvering made for a more permanent setting?
It refers to the appointee may continue in that position for longer than 6 months.
And that would be up to your discretion as Director of HR. It would not need to come back to us, correct?
That is correct.
Okay.
That is correct. As I said earlier, acting appointments, temporary appointments are fairly common. Okay. You have situations where somebody's either out on a leave of absence, or even a case of somebody being on a long-term vacation or something like that, where we'll take an electrical lineman and move them up to acting supervisor for a few weeks. And
Right.
in that particular memorandum of understanding, they'll get a bump in their pay for the period of time that they're in that role. These things occur all the time, and again, management generally has the right to make those appointments, but it's when it conflicts with the establishment of a list is when we've become concerned, and that's where it becomes the concern of the commission that, hey, wait a minute, we're doing a process, and if that process yields a list of people that should be appointed to that position, then unless someone has a good reason for not appointing off that list, we would thus force them to go to that list and fill the position on a permanent basis and stop this acting temporary staff.
I don't even want to think about the person being moved up and then being moved back down because they didn't really fit the bill, and have them come and ask for a hearing, performance-based transfer. So as long as this move is really being done and the person who's being moved up knows it's temporary, I would be more comfortable.
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Very clear.
Until it's made permanent, obviously. I have no more questions. Thank you.
I move for approval.
Second.
Unanimous consent. Thank you very much. Next item, please.
Request to extend name on layoff list for the position of administrative associate.
Thank you. Mr. Doyle?
Okay, Mr. Chair, members of the Commission, this is another item that doesn't come up very often, but we actually have two of these, one after another, but this is a request to extend a name on a layoff list. This one is for administrative associate. The next item is for public works administrator. When the organization has to impose layoffs, the individuals affected are either removed from their position, or removed from their position and laid off, or removed from their position or bumped into another position within the organization. Once they are removed from that primary position, their names are placed on what's known as a layoff list, and they can remain there on that list in case there are subsequent openings for that particular position. They can be reinstated into that particular position. Under the civil service rules and under our layoff procedure, if an individual is placed on a layoff list, their name gets placed on for a period of 2 years. The rules do provide that extension can be granted for that individual or the individuals on those lists for another 2 years, and the rules do require that the Commission grant that approval. Tonight we have actually two such requests. The first is Ms. Thelma Salaya, who was laid off from a position of administrative associate. And the second one, which we'll get to on the next item, I don't want to take them out of order, but the next one involves a managerial position, public works administrator, Mr. Wiedeker. Both of these individuals are seeking to have their names renewed for another 2 years. The initial layoffs occurred in August of 2012, and as we're approaching August 2014, the 2 years is expiring, and thus these requests are being made. There's not a great deal of information we have for the Commission. I don't think it's appropriate to get into job performance or anything like that. Suffice it to say, these requests have been made. We do not oppose it. The departments that they either work in now or came from have no opposition to this request. Therefore, we ask that the Commission render a decision to allow them to remain on the list for 2 years.
Before I open it up for questions, I just want to ask for clarification purposes only. You made a statement that it's not appropriate to bring it up as far as performance, but these are not performance-based layoffs, correct?
That's correct.
Right.
That's correct.
And the requests for renewal of one's name to remain on the layoff list has nothing to do with performance. So it's really not relevant to performance. It's just relevant to a person's desire to remain on the layoff list should that position that they once occupied be now available again for whatever reason, budgetary or other concerns that may have been alleviated in the near future, hopefully. With that, I don't have any questions, but I ask if others have any questions to please pose them.
I just have one. In view of the fact, and we just talked about it a minute ago, that we're changing the classifications of many positions throughout the city. And let's say there's a layoff list for a particular classification at the time it was established, and let's say that classification is no longer valid. Let's say they've changed that. Does that mean that everybody on the layoff list is no longer eligible to obtain a job at any of those classifications?
I'm not sure I understand.
Well, that's a great question.
My question's related. These positions still exist?
Yeah.
That for the layoff list that they're...
They both, these classifications do exist. The Public Works Administrator is not being used. It's a rather high-level managerial position, not currently fitting into the department organization right now. The administrative associate is a classification that is used and still in effect in several departments throughout the city. So,
I'm sorry, did you?
No, that answered my question.
So let's talk about do you need to do these together? Can we do?
No, they can be.
Okay. Well, I would move for approval then on the administrative associate.
Is there any other questions?
On Celaya, no, I don't have
Oh,
questions.
okay, very well. Then I second, well, you want to second that? So
Sure, I'll second it.
Okay.
Yes.
Unanimous consent as to that. Thank you. Next item, please.
Request to extend name on layoff list for Public Works Administrator.
Thank you. Mr. Doyle.
Mr. Chair, similar to the previous item, this is a request by Mr. Wiedeker to remain on the layoff list for Public Works Administrator. Really all pretty much the same facts as the previous item. The layoff took effect in 2012, August 2012, and the classification, the position was eliminated. That was a year of extreme budget cuts throughout the organization, and the department determined that they just did not need a position at that level performing those functions.
You're talking about Public Works
Administrator, yes. Yes.
That's it?
That is, yeah.
Clarification, there was no letter attached to this item that you asked us. Versus the earlier item, there was a letter from Ms. Celaya.
Correct.
Is this something that, I take your word for it, obviously, it is the desire of Mr. Whitaker to remain on the layoff list based on some form of communication he must have had with you, correct?
Chair Gazarian, yes. I received an email from Mr. Whitaker, and the report indicates such. I didn't attach the email because it contained
Other
information not really pertinent to.
In the future, please redact the other information and let us see it.
Okay.
Thank you. Okay. Very well. Questions?
Well, I want to get back to what we were just talking about on. If I'm understanding correctly, there is no more position of Public Works Administrator.
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Devine, the classification is still in existence. However, the Public Works Department is currently not utilizing that classification in its organizational structure. Mr. Zern, when he was heading that department, didn't see a continued need for it. We have a new department head there. He may have a different view of it, and if he does, then perhaps we would reconsider. If he wants to fill, Mr. Galanian, for example, wants to fill a Public Works Administrator level position, then that would be his prerogative, and if that's the case, then we would go and select Mr. Wiedeker off this list.
What would happen? I'm sorry. Go ahead. What would happen if the second two-year period expired? Would Mr. Whitaker be able to remain on the layoff list beyond the second two-year period? And if not, I wonder how Mr. Whitaker would feel if a month or two after the expiration of the second two-year period, all of a sudden that position now becomes a necessary position.
Don't know.
But
the
so
answer to your first question
the first question,
is,
yeah.
the renewal can only be requested for another 2 years.
Okay. So-
there's no provision for yet an additional renewal.
Is Mr. Whitaker currently employed with the city?
He's currently employed. In fact, he was laid off from this position, but was able to be placed in another position elsewhere in the organization, also within the Public Works Department.
I see. Okay.
Is there only one, I'm sorry,
Good. No, I'm done.
is there only one Public Works Administrator position in the city?
There was only ever one, yes, and it's now not filled.
So being on the list is really kind of a moot point unless, as Mr. Gazarian said, that they all of a sudden decide to reactivate that.
Unless within the next 2 years, Mr. Galanian decides to utilize that title again in his organizational structure.
But if he utilizes it after the 2-year period, Mr. Whitaker would not be having first option of seeking that position, but rather he would still be eligible to seek.
Yes.
To fill the position, except he will no longer be the person that was on the layoff list for the last 4 years, right?
That's correct.
Right. Commissioner Kubian?
Is this title driven or is it sort of duties driven? Because it seems to me that the function can be performed by another position, but as long as you don't call it Public Works Administrator, then whoever's on the layoff list can't access it. I mean, I guess my question remains, is it title driven or is it duties or function driven?
It's mainly duties driven, and again, when you look at why a layoff occurs, it's either there isn't work for an individual or you need to reduce your costs. And as I said, this is a pretty high level position, and at the time when these layoffs were occurring, there were a significant need to reduce costs. And again, the administration at that time within Public Works, found this would be a way to reduce costs.
Would it be fair to say that they absorbed the duties amongst others who have occupied or continue to occupy positions? The duties remained necessary duties. Somebody is performing those duties. It's not somebody instead of Mr. Whitaker, but rather someone or more than one person taking on some of the duties that in total made up what Mr. Whitaker's position was. Is that correct?
That would be correct, Mr. Chair, and that's really the byproduct of layoffs and downsizing, is that positions get eliminated and that work has to be done by other individuals. And it's
okay. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Let's carry this a step further. Let's say, and this is just kind of academically speaking, let's say that Mr. Whitaker is laid off for the position he's in now, the one that they put him in lieu of the Public Works Administrator. Let's say the city decides to do away with that position. Does he then get to be on two layoff lists, the one from the Public Works Administrator and the one that he's currently in now?
Yeah, that would be correct. Anytime you're laid off from a particular position, and if it should happen twice, then yeah, you would have the right to be on two layoff lists.
Anything else?
No.
Anything else?
I move for approval.
Any question?
Well, I just don't know what the point is of having someone on a list for a position that may not exist. I understand the billet's still there, or technically the position's still there, but sometimes when these things happen, maybe I shouldn't get into that. I mean, reorganizations sometimes promote efficiency, and having this person remain on a list may create some false hope for this person. I don't know. I don't know that it makes sense. But those are just my comments. I'll probably abstain.
I wouldn't be happier if all of us were wrong, but I share your sentiments. Motion?
Mr. Devine made a motion.
Oh, you did make a motion. Okay.
I second.
The person wishes to remain on the layoff list for 2 more years.
I won't oppose.
Very well.
Did you want
Unanimous
to
consent.
roll call vote on this one, or did you want?
I thought I heard the
Unanimous.
commissioner say I won't oppose. Yes. Very well. It's unanimous. We will grant the person's wish. Thank you. Next item, please.
Item 12A, past due employee performance evaluations.
Thank you. Mr. Doyle?
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, attached is your list of late performance evaluations. Again, we have a few departments with no past dues, and we have some that are a couple of second notices and several that with first notices. But for the most part, given the number of a salaried employee count, not a bad record thus far. So it's a note and file item. If you have questions, be happy to try and answer them for you.
Am I reading this correctly, that Human Resources has
There's two.
Yes.
Yes, you are.
Do we need to call in the director? And
I think,
I show up to the meeting and explain myself.
Finance and Fire are keeping company with Human Resources. As long as I don't see third notices, I'm okay. Although second notices kind of make you a little nervous, right? Yeah, very well. Any other questions? No questions or comments? Okay, thank you, Mr. Doyle. The second item on the item 12?
12B, suspension of competition, notice of appointment of Thomas Lorenz to the position of Director of Communications and Community Relations.
Thank you, Mr. Doyle.
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, this is just a notification of the city's intention to appoint Tom Lorenz to the executive level position of Director of Communications and Community Relations. The authority is listed, this Article 24, Section 5.2 of the Charter has the discussion of this whole concept of suspending competition. There's language in the civil service rules which is almost identical to that, and it talks about a position that is created by ordinance, and this appointment is being made by the city manager, and it's to take effect August 1st. The charter and rules do require that the commission be notified that city manager or the appointing authority does intend to appoint this individual based on recognized attainment, and the competition shall be suspended. You're well aware of Mr. Lorenz, his qualifications and such, and I was hoping to have Mr. Lorenz here as well as the city manager and assistant city manager, but they've been called to some type of a community meeting up in Montrose for which they could not get out of, and they do extend their apologies for not being here. But I do hope you're comfortable with this action, and if you have questions, I'm happy to try and answer them for you.
Any questions? I have a question. Any questions? No. I just want to clarify. First of all, it's a great appointment, but I believe that this is an office that was created by ordinance, correct?
That's correct.
Right. So I think their presence, other than their smiling faces, is not really necessary for us to move on this, and I propose that we move on this.
I don't think we need to move. I think it's information.
Oh, we don't need to move on this. Yeah. Well, it's duly noted.
Thank you.
And congratulations to Sergeant Tom Lorenz. Thank you. Next item, please.
Civil Service Commission, staff comments.
Thank you. I want to take the opportunity once again to welcome you, Mr. Harigi.
Thank you, Chair.
Harigi, yes. Am I saying it right?
Yes.
Very good. Very good. And I also want to take this opportunity to thank and bid the best wishes to the departing commissioner who I initially replaced the first time around and had the pleasure of working with, Ara Hatamian. And I look forward to continued working relationship with Commissioner Harigi. Any other comments?
I echo those sentiments. Thank you. Welcome.
Thank you. It's my pleasure to be here, and I look forward to working with the chair and the commission and the city.
Oh, Sam is not here. Oh, yes, I thank you. Yeah, I also thank you for reminding me. I also want to offer on my behalf, and I believe I'm sure on behalf of all of us, our deep condolences to Commissioner Sam Manoukian, who has suffered a death in the family, and that is the reason why he is not here this evening. And our hearts go out to him and his wife, and I'll be talking to him later, I'm sure, as all of us will. Thank you very much. Any other items we have, or is this it?
Move to adjourn?
To adjourn it is. Thank you. We are adjourned.